A man boards a train in Milan. Quiet, unremarkable, carrying a paperback and a slim briefcase. 2 rows behind him sits a woman scrolling through her phone. Across the aisle, a photographer captures Italian landscapes. Normal passengers on a normal morning, except none of them are who they claim to be. 3 hours later, the man is found dead in a locked bathroom. Foam at his lips. The faint smell of almonds in the air. No weapon, no struggle. Authorities call it natural causes until fingerprints reveal. The corpse belongs to a senior Hamas commander. Israel had been hunting for years. This was assassination perfected. Invisible, untraceable. Executed in motion. The conductor knocked 3 times before forcing the lavatory door. What he found inside would trigger an international investigation that exposed the invisible machinery of modern assassination. The body showed no trauma, no violence, nothing that suggested foul play. Yet within hours, intelligence agencies across 3 continents were exchanging encrypted communications about a man who had died exactly the way Israel's most elite operatives were trained to make people disappear. Mahmoud al-Khalid wasn't his real name. The passport was one of 27 false identities used over 8 years of operating in the shadows between Gaza, Damascus, and European capitals. 2. Hamas, he was Abu Tariq, the silent engineer who designed financial networks that moved millions in weapons funding. To Mossad, he was Priority Red, a target whose elimination had been authorized at the highest levels of Israeli government. And to the passengers who shared carriage with him that morning, he was just another quiet traveler, reading a paperback and minding his own business. What none of them knew was that 2 rows behind him sat a woman who wasn't really a tourist. That the man photographing landscapes through the window wasn't an amateur photographer. That beneath the seat ahead of Mahmoud sat a modified device smaller than a deodorant canister. Time to release a toxin so sophisticated it would mimic cardiac arrest hours after exposure. The machinery of assassination had been set in motion days earlier. And by the time the train left Milan's platform, Mahmoud's death was already a mathematical certainty. This is the story of how intelligence services transform murder into art, how bureaucracy becomes the architecture of elimination, and how a man can be killed in plain sight while leaving investigators with nothing but questions. It's about the invisible war, being fought across European cities by operatives whose greatest weapon isn't violence, but the ability to make violence look like anything else. And it reveals something darker than any single death: the existence of a global system, where certain people can be erased from existence with surgical precision, leaving behind only the illusion of natural order. Understanding how Mahmoud died requires understanding who he was and why his elimination was deemed necessary by a state thousands of miles away. Born in 1967 in Gaza City, he grew up in neighborhoods where the smell of sea salt mixed with gunpowder. His father taught school. His mother worked as a nurse at a UN clinic. From childhood, he watched tanks roll past his home and soldiers bark orders in languages he didn't yet understand. Every explosion etched itself into memory like a promise he would one day fulfill. Gaza in the 1970s and 80s was a laboratory of occupation. Checkpoints, curfews, arbitrary arrests, the daily humiliation of life under military control. Mahmoud's family struggled like everyone else, surviving on rationed food and avoiding the wrong kind of attention from Israeli patrols. He learned young that survival required observation. You watched more than you spoke. You remembered faces and names. You became invisible when necessary and only visible when useful. These instincts would later define his operational methodology. School records describe him as unervingly calm and exceptionally disciplined. While other students reacted emotionally to the constant violence around them, Mahmoud processed it analytically. He excelled in mathematics and languages, teaching himself Hebrew by secretly listening to Israeli military radio frequencies and transcribing what he heard. By adolescence, he was already carrying messages for local resistance groups, folding coded notes beneath the lining of his shoes and walking them across neighborhoods while Israeli patrols watched without suspecting the quiet teenager. The first Intifada erupted when Mahmoud was 20, transforming Gaza into a battlefield of stones against armor. He watched from rooftops as young men threw rocks at armored jeeps, symbolic Gestures of resistance that usually ended in arrests or worse. But Mahmoud saw something others missed. Power wasn't about strength, but precision. Violence without strategy was just noise. This realization shaped everything that followed, transforming him from another angry youth into something far more dangerous. A tactician who understood that patience and calculation could accomplish what rage never could. What distinguished Mahmoud from other militants wasn't ideology, but methodology. He wasn't driven by blind hatred, but by cold analysis. He viewed conflict as a science of timing and leverage, not emotion. Friends described him as meticulous, never impulsive, never loud. His temper remained buried beneath layers of control. He kept a pocket notebook filled with coded phrases, diagrams, and numbers. He recorded every encounter, every contact, every potential security risk. His obsession with order bordered on ritual. He preferred even numbers for meetings, even numbered hotel rooms, even digits in phone codes. To him, structure meant safety. Disorder meant death. He rarely smiled, but when he did, it served specific purposes: to calm, to deceive, to command. He avoided alcohol and crowds, choosing solitude over the risks of social interaction. A confidant later recalled him saying something that captured his entire worldview. A man who talks too much becomes a map others can read. A man who listens becomes a shadow. That shadow became his identity. The operational persona that allowed him to move through hostile territories for decades without being caught. Within Hamas circles, Mahmoud rose through patient accumulation of trust and demonstrated competence. He didn't seek leadership through charisma or speeches, but through results. When others planned operations that failed, his succeeded. When others exposed their networks through carelessness, his remained compartmentalized and secure. By the late 1990s, he had become indispensable. The man who could move money across borders, coordinate weapons shipments, and maintain communications between separated cells without leaving digital footprints that intelligence services could track. Israeli intelligence first flagged him during the first Einifat when he was arrested carrying coded letters and a list of safe houses. They held him for 7 months under administrative detention, interrogating him repeatedly. But Mahmoud gave them nothing. Officers described him as unbreakable, a prisoner, who spoke minimally and never raised his eyes, repeating the same sentence in Arabic and Hebrew. You already know what you want to hear. This performance solidified his reputation. When released, he wasn't just another former prisoner. He was a symbol of resistance through discipline. His operational approach evolved through the 1990s as he recognized that traditional militant tactics had reached their limits. Suicide bombings and armed attacks brought attention, but not strategic advantage. What Hamas needed was infrastructure, the invisible networks of finance and logistics that could sustain operations over years rather than months. Mahmoud became the architect of this infrastructure, designing decentralized systems where each cell knew only its immediate contacts, ensuring that if one part was compromised, the whole network wouldn't collapse. By 2000, he had relocated to Damascus, operating under the protection of the Syrian regime that hosted exiled Palestinian leaders as part of its regional strategy. From Damascus, Mahmoud coordinated a covert logistics network, informally known as Al-Maslak. The path. Its purpose was simple: create decentralized financial and transport systems for moving weapons, funds, and intelligence across borders. He recruited engineers, bankers, and smugglers, binding them through loyalty and encrypted communication protocols that made interception nearly impossible. The network extended across Cyprus, Lebanon, and the Sinai Peninsula. European security services began detecting unusual patterns. Cargo containers rerouted through multiple ports. Charitable organizations funneling cash through discrete banks in Zurich and Vienna. Mahmoud orchestrated it all while maintaining the facade of a humanitarian coordinator. To diplomats, he appeared as someone helping refugees. To militants, he was the invisible hand moving pieces on a chessboard that stretched from Gaza to Istanbul. Israeli and American intelligence agencies labeled him a facilitator, a bureaucratic term that understated his influence while hinting at his danger. Inside Hamas, rival factions grew wary. Some viewed him as just another bureaucrat in exile. Others recognized him as a silent kingmaker whose networks provided the resources that kept their operations functioning. But none could match his access or his operational security. Mahmoud had achieved something rare in that world. He had become indispensable, and that made him temporarily untouchable. His methods were surgical rather than spectacular. When a collaborator needed to be eliminated, the death appeared natural. When a weapons shipment needed protection, it moved through routes that Israeli drones couldn't predict. He treated geography as geometry, calculating angles and timing with mathematical precision. In 2006, intercepted communication suggested his involvement in financing the kidnapping of Israeli soldier Gilead Shalit. Though he never appeared in official messages, coded ledgers revealed transactions matching the operation's logistics. 4. Mossad. This was confirmation that Mahmoud wasn't just funding terrorism, but directing specific operations. Between 2005 and 2008, intelligence reports linked him to coordinated smuggling networks, transporting advanced weaponry from Libya and Sudan through Sinai tunnels. He designed routes that exploited terrain and timing to evade Israeli surveillance. Each operation demonstrated his engineering mindset, approaching problems with the cold logic of someone for whom violence was simply another variable in complex equations. He once told a confidant something that revealed his philosophy. If you leave a body behind, it should speak louder than 1,000 speeches. Fear was a tool, not an emotion. These acts drew increasing attention from Western agencies. Passports under the names Faris Nasser and Henisalan appeared in multiple flight logs. Mahmoud slipped through borders by changing not just documents but his entire presentation, his walk, his accent, even the rhythm of his breathing. Survival had become an art form practiced daily. He understood that the moment you became predictable was the moment you became vulnerable. So he embraced chaos in his movements while maintaining rigid control over his operations. In March 2007, a warehouse explosion in Port Sudan destroyed a shipment of arms intended for Gaza. Local authorities called it an accident, but classified reports linked the incident to Mossad interception, guided by leaked information from within Mahmoud's network. From that moment, he began purging his ranks, quietly removing anyone whose loyalty seemed questionable. Trust became a currency, measured in absolute terms. You were either completely reliable or completely expendable. By 2010, Mahmoud had become one of the most wanted men in multiple intelligence databases, CIA and MI6. Analysts cataloged his travel patterns, identifying at least 27 false identities. Used over 8 years. His movements traced through Athens, Vienna, and Budapest, always leaving minimal digital footprints. Interpol marked him as a transnational operative. Though few outside classified circles knew his real face, he had perfected the art of being simultaneously everywhere and nowhere. A ghost whose influence was undeniable, but whose location remained perpetually uncertain. Then in mid-2010, Mossad's internal directorate placed him on the TIT list, a classified ledger of individuals deemed legitimate targets for neutralization abroad. The decision followed weeks of debate between political and security leaders who determined that eliminating him would sever funding arteries sustaining Hamas operations in Europe. His death, they argued, would be both message and necessity. The authorization came through an encrypted transmission known only by its code phrase, Operation Cedar Mirror. What Mahmoud didn't know as he continued his careful movements through European cities was that every step had become part of a countdown. Israeli surveillance teams tracked him from Athens to Istanbul, Milan to Rome. Analysts in Tel Aviv studied his patterns, looking for the vulnerable moment when operational conditions would align perfectly. They needed a location where an assassination could be staged as natural death, where operatives could execute the mission and extract without leaving evidence, and where diplomatic fallout could be managed through plausible deniability. The opportunity materialized when intelligence detected Mahmoud planning travel from Milan to Rome via train. The intercity route offered nearly perfect conditions, contained environment, predictable schedule, multiple extraction points. A train presented unique advantages over aircraft or hotels. The closed system, limited variables. The movement provided cover for toxin dispersal and the destination's security infrastructure could be bypassed entirely since the operation would conclude before arrival. Mossad Caesarea unit began operational. Planning immediately. Caesarea specialized in assassinations abroad, drawing members from Israel's most elite military units and subjecting them to years of additional training in surveillance, weapons, escape protocols, and the psychological conditioning required to kill with professional detachment. Their operations followed a template refined over decades, minimal team size to reduce exposure, maximum compartmentalization to prevent compromise, and absolute commitment to leaving no traceable evidence. 3 operatives were selected for the Milan-Rome mission. Their cover identities were built from fragments of real lives supported by meticulously forged passports that had cost months to prepare. They would enter Italy separately, establish themselves under tourist pretexts, and coordinate the operation through encrypted devices that appeared as ordinary electronics. The psychological profiles of chosen operatives emphasized specific traits: ability to maintain cover under stress, comfort with solitude, and capacity for moral compartmentalization that allowed execution of lethal missions without subsequent trauma. On October 9, 2010, the team arrived at Milan's Malpensa airport using the names Martin Weiss, Clara Roth, and Daniel Levy. Their entry times were staggered to avoid pattern recognition by security systems. Each carried lightweight luggage containing communications equipment embedded in power banks and chargers. They moved with the practiced ease of experienced travelers. Nothing about their behavior suggesting the lethal purpose behind their presence. Their base of operations was an apartment rented under a deceased Italian businessman's name, one of many ghost properties maintained by Israeli intelligence across European cities. Inside, they established a command post with encrypted satellite uplinks to Tel Aviv. The apartment's location near Milan's central station provided easy access to transportation hubs while maintaining sufficient distance from tourist areas where foreign operatives might attract attention. Mahmoud had been under surveillance since his arrival in Milan 3 days earlier. A sensor placed behind his hotel room doorframe monitored movement, temperature, and sound. When he purchased his train ticket to Rome, the operation entered its final phase. The team divided responsibilities with surgical precision. Weiss would shadow Mahmoud's financial activity and movements. Roth would establish herself on the same train, posing as a casual traveler. Levy would handle logistics, communications, and escape coordination. Cameras hidden in Roth's hotel room streamed encrypted footage to Tel Aviv, where analysts logged every detail of Mahmoud's routine. They noted his habits: morning tea, late breakfast, brief phone calls in Arabic, long silences staring from his balcony. He met no one directly, trusting only movement to provide security. But the operatives were already inside his pattern, anticipating his choices before he made them. They knew his seat number on the Rome train before he purchased the ticket. The toxin selected for the operation reflected decades of research into untraceable poisons. Dimethylmercury offered specific advantages: extremely high toxicity requiring only microscopic doses, delayed onset that could be calibrated to hours after exposure, and symptoms mimicking cardiac arrest. Forensic pathologists would interpret the death as natural unless specifically looking for mercury compounds, and even then the chemical form used was designed to degrade rapidly, making definitive identification difficult. The delivery system was equally sophisticated: a modified aerosol device disguised as a common travel deodorant canister contained the toxin in a chemical membrane activated by vibration. The device's internal timer would trigger release during the train's motion, dispersing the poison through air circulation systems in measured doses. The container would be discarded at an intermediate stop, ensuring no physical evidence remained by the time investigators began their work. On the morning of October 15th, Weiss followed Mahmoud to Milan Central Station, maintaining the careful distance that surveillance specialists master through years of practice. Roth boarded the same train 15 minutes later, taking a seat 2 rows behind the target. Levy rode ahead in the next carriage, positioned to coordinate communications and monitor for any unexpected complications. Their movements were choreographed through rehearsals conducted in safe houses across Europe, every gesture timed, every contingency planned. Intercity 582 departed Milan at precisely 910. Mahmoud took his assigned window seat in carriage 4, placing his briefcase on his lap and adjusting his glasses before opening a paperback copy of Machiavelli's The Prince. Observers would later note the irony of his reading choice. 2. Rows behind, Roth appeared absorbed in her phone while discreetly activating the aerosol device beneath her seat. The toxin began its silent work, microdoses entering the carriage's air circulation. The next 90 minutes unfolded with the mundane rhythm of ordinary travel. Mahmoud read his book. Passengers dozed or worked on laptops. The Italian countryside scrolled past windows. Nothing suggested that molecular level. Violence was occurring invisibly in the air. At 10:45, Mahmoud visited the cafe. Car where surveillance footage captured him sipping espresso alone. Calm, unaware that his body was already processing the poison that would stop his heart. He returned to his seat at 11:10. Still showing no symptoms, Roth adjusted the air vent to redirect circulation, increasing the toxin's concentration around Mahmoud's position. He began coughing lightly but dismissed it as nothing, reaching for water and then his notebook, where he scribbled Arabic numerals and sequences that investigators would later find incomplete and indecipherable. By the time the train approached Rome, his complexion had padded noticeably. He stood unsteadily and moved toward the lavatory, staggering slightly. Inside the locked compartment, the toxin completed its work. His breathing slowed, his pulse weakened, consciousness faded. The symptoms precisely matched cardiac arrest induced by stress or pre-existing condition. When the conductor knocked 30 minutes later, Mahmoud was unresponsive, his eyes fixed and dilated, his body cooling under fluorescent light. Meanwhile, Roth had disembarked at Florence. Weiss and Levy exited separately at Rome Termini, blending into the morning crowd. The operation's visible phase had lasted less than 3 hours. The tools and techniques demonstrated Mossad's reputation for precision minimalism. Every element served multiple purposes while maintaining plausible innocence. The aerosol canister built in a Tel Aviv laboratory appeared identical to commercial products available in any pharmacy. Its internal mechanism was activated by motion, perfect for train travel where constant vibration provided natural trigger conditions. The poison's delayed onset meant operatives could be hours away before symptoms manifested. Communication between agents occurred through coded Bluetooth pulses emitted from modified earbuds. Each message, lasting less than a second and encoded in frequency shifts imperceptible to human hearing. A single pulse signified target confirmed. 3 pulses indicated abort. None were needed that day. 2. Conceal evidence. Weiss discarded the aerosol device in a recycling bin at Florence Station, where it would later be melted with industrial waste. The tracking device used to monitor Mahmoud's movements was programmed to self-fry upon signal loss, erasing all data. The operation came within seconds of exposure multiple times. A customs officer in Milan had briefly questioned Roth's luggage, pausing on the deodorant canister. Weiss intervened casually, posing as a fellow passenger helping translate. The officer smiled and moved on. Later on the train, a child seated near Mahmoud accidentally dropped a toy that nearly struck the hidden device. Roth retrieved it with practiced calm, masking the terror beneath her composed exterior. Every second carried the weight of potential disaster, but fate or calculation carried the mission forward flawlessly. When the conductor finally opened the lavatory door, the scene appeared unremarkable. Mahmoud slumped against the sink, his briefcase beside him, eyes wide but unfocused. The faint almond scent in the air blended with detergent. No wound, no weapon, only stillness. Emergency responders declared him dead at 13:42, citing possible heart failure. His passport listed him as Mahmoud al-Khaled, businessman, age 43. The initial report noted no signs of foul play. Italian police sealed the carriage for examination, unaware that the true cause of death had already dissipated through the ventilation system. Within 48 hours, all 3 operatives had left Europe using different routes and alternate identities. Operation Cedar Mirror was officially archived in Tel Aviv with the notation accomplished without trace. Mahmoud's death was ruled natural causes. Yet those fluent in the language of covert warfare recognized its signature immediately. The autopsy at Rome's Sapienza University revealed no external trauma. The heart displayed abnormal fibrillation. The lungs showed mild discoloration consistent with chemical inhalation. Toxicologists detected trace mercury compounds in the bloodstream, but couldn't determine their form or origin. The preliminary report concluded cardiac arrest induced by stress or exposure to an unknown contaminant. A pathologist privately noted something disturbing: the peculiar symmetry of internal damage, cellular degradation, without visible poisoning. Too clean, he told a colleague, almost as if someone wanted it to look natural. When Interpol ran Mahmoud's fingerprints, his real identity surfaced immediately. Within hours, encrypted communications began flowing between intelligence agencies in Tel Aviv, Brussels, and Washington. Italian security services reviewed surveillance footage from Milan and Rome stations, discovering anomalies. 3. Individuals had appeared repeatedly in Mahmoud's proximity. Their movements synchronized with his, their faces partially obscured, their passports later revealed as sophisticated forgeries using stolen identities from citizens across Europe. The scandal echoed the 2010 Dubai operation when Mossad operatives used similar forged documents during the assassination of Hamas commander Mahmoud al-Maba. Diplomatic tension rose immediately. Italy demanded explanations from Israel, but official channels returned only silence. The Israeli Foreign Ministry issued a brief statement expressing no knowledge of the event. Behind closed doors, intelligence alliances strained under the weight of plausible deniability that everyone understood, but no one could prove. Media outlets seized the narrative of phantom death on a moving train, executed by invisible hands. Speculation filled headlines. European security services privately admitted admiration for the operation's precision, even as they condemned it publicly. The case revealed something uncomfortable. Modern intelligence services could conduct sophisticated assassinations almost anywhere when properly motivated, and no amount of sovereignty could truly protect targets marked for elimination by states possessing the resources and will to reach across borders. Hamas declared Mahmoud a martyr, accusing Israel of violating international law. In Gaza, thousands attended a symbolic funeral, waving flags and chanting vows of vengeance. In Tel Aviv, officials neither confirmed nor denied involvement, maintaining the strategic ambiguity that characterized all sensitive operations. The Italian government faced domestic outrage over the sovereignty breach. Opposition leaders demanded investigation into foreign espionage on national soil. Behind the scenes, NATO intelligence channels reassessed Israeli activity within Europe, quietly tightening surveillance. But public memory faded quickly, consumed by newer crises. Mahmoud's death, like many before it, dissolved into the gray fog of geopolitical necessity. Only those operating in the shadows remembered its perfection. The operation had demonstrated something that intelligence professionals understood but rarely acknowledged publicly. Certain individuals could be eliminated with surgical precision anywhere in the world, leaving behind only the illusion of natural order and questions without satisfying answers. The bureaucratic machinery that authorized Mahmoud's death operated far from the train where he died. In fluorescent-lit offices within Mossad headquarters, analysts had spent months building the case for his elimination. Every operation passed through layers of authorization, each stamped with a cold precision of factory blueprints. Lawyers reviewed international law implications. Political liaison assessed diplomatic risks. Medical experts evaluated toxin options. The language used was deliberately administrative, designed to sound like business rather than murder. Operations weren't called assassinations, but resolutions. Targets weren't people, but problems requiring solutions. This linguistic sanitization allowed those involved to maintain psychological distance from the ultimate reality of what they authorized. The hand that signed the death order never saw the face that died. And in that distance lay the perfection of modern statecraft, the ability to kill without ever touching blood, to eliminate threats through paperwork that transformed moral decisions into bureaucratic processes. The operatives who executed the mission belonged to Mossad's Caesarea unit, an organization that exists in the space between myth and reality. These specialists live under assumed identities in apartments across Europe and the Middle East. There, neighbors unaware that behind thin walls sit people trained to end lives precisely and quietly. Their weapons are routine and patience. They blend into airports, cafes, and train stations. Through years of practice at becoming invisible, they speak many languages, hold many passports, but belong nowhere. Failure is a word unspoken in their world. Survival is measured by successful disappearance after each mission. They leave no medals, no graves, no flags. Their victories are marked only by silence and the absence of those they've been sent to eliminate. And when one of them retires, reassigns, or simply vanishes, no one asks questions. The invisible legions exist only as whispers in corridors where nations trade deniability for dominance. The Rome operation belonged to a lineage stretching back decades. In 1973, Operation Wrath of God sent teams across Europe hunting Black September operatives. Men were shot in doorways, poisoned in hotel rooms, tracked through fogged train windows. The Lahammer mistake, where an innocent man died due to mistaken identity, taught Mossad to evolve, to never again leave traces of doubt. Each subsequent operation refined the methodology, learning from both successes and in failures. In the 1990s, a car bomb in Beirut obliterated a Hezbollah commander. In 2010 Dubai, Mahmoud al-Mabou was suffocated in a luxury hotel by assassins disguised as tennis players. Cameras caught them, but identities melted like smoke. Mahmoud al-Khaled's death was an echo of these operations born from decades of learned invisibility. Every method, every misdirection was inheritance passed through generations of operatives who perfected the art of making people disappear. For Palestinians, Mahmoud's death sparked immediate mourning mixed with defiance. In Gaza's crowded alleys, his photograph appeared framed in black cloth. Thousands gathered for symbolic funeral ceremonies, chanting his name and vowing continued resistance. Speakers hailed him as a martyr of precision, someone who fought with intellect rather than guns. The sound of grief mixed with promises of vengeance. The familiar rhythm of a conflict where each death feeds the cycle rather than ending it. In Tel Aviv, the event passed without public ceremony. Inside intelligence offices, analysts archived the mission file with clinical detachment. For them, emotion held no place in operational assessment. The objective had been achieved. Hamas networks in Europe would be disrupted, at least temporarily. Yet, even within Mossad, some felt the weight of what had been done. Each victory carried echoes of inevitability. One more name erased, one more file closed, one more cycle of violence deferred rather than ended. The international reaction revealed the contradictions of modern statecraft. Italy protested the sovereignty violation while privately understanding that little could be done. European nations condemned the operation publicly while their intelligence services studied its methods for potential application. The United States circulated internal assessments, noting the operation's precision while maintaining official distance from any endorsement. Diplomatic language masked the reality that most governments recognized. Assassination as foreign policy would continue as long as nations possessed both motivation and capability. Mahmoud's death altered little on the surface, but rippled through the architecture of Covert operations worldwide. Hamas reorganized its European channels, learning from his precision and his downfall. Young operatives studied his methods while noting the mistakes that led to his exposure. His legend became both instruction and warning. Be invisible, but never believe you're untouchable. Israel strengthened its reputation for global reach, sending the message that no protection was absolute and no location truly safe. In the years following, new figures rose to fill Mahmoud's absence. Each carried fragments of his ideology, but none his restraint. The balance he had maintained between strategy and violence dissolved, giving way to leaders driven more by vengeance than vision. Thus the assassination that sought stability instead invited a new generation of chaos. The predictable consequence of eliminating tacticians and leaving ideologues to fill the vacuum. The truth that emerged from the Rome operation was darker than any single death. It revealed a world built upon invisible decisions where justice is measured in secrecy and morality dissolves in classified ink. Nations kill quietly. Truth survives only as rumor, and the machinery of state power grinds forward without pause or accountability. Mahmoud became another name on a list that never ends. His file closed and erased while somewhere in the bureaucratic depths of intelligence headquarters, Another name was already being prepared for similar fate. The train still runs between Milan and Rome. Passengers sit in carriage 4, unaware of what happened there. Commuters occupy the same seats where Mahmoud died, their morning routines untouched by history that passed quietly. Through their compartment, the lavatory has been cleaned 10,000 times since that October morning. The air circulation system continues its endless recycling of breath and space. Nothing marks the location of his death, because that's how perfection looks. Ordinary, unremarkable, leaving no trace that anything extraordinary ever occurred. What does Mahmoud Alqald's death reveal about the world we live in? That's certain. People can be eliminated anywhere, anytime, by states that possess the will and resources to reach across borders. That sovereignty means nothing when powerful nations decide someone must die. That truth becomes whatever remains. After evidence vanishes. Drop your thoughts in the comments. If this investigation into invisible warfare made you see international relations differently, hit that like button and share this video. Subscribe because we're exposing the operations that governments deny and the machinery of power that operates in perpetual shadow. Hit the notification bell. The next buried operation is already unfolding somewhere, waiting to be revealed.